Okay, so we are moving along here in Sri Aurobindo's masterpiece, The Life Divine. We're up to chapter 27, The Sevenfold Chord of Being. Now, this is an interesting chapter because so far he recapitulates a bit and he goes back and he says, okay, so we've gone through these seven basic principles. We start with Sat, Chit, and Ananda, being, consciousness, bliss. Those are the first three. And then he adds to that a fourth principle, supermind. So already notice there that the traditional Indian mentalities are always in terms of trichotomies, triplicities, just as they are in Christianity with Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. So he has come along and added a fourth principle, supermind, to this original triplicity, which is in itself an innovation. Jung would like the idea because Jung loved quaternios. He loved principles of four, and he would always say anytime you have a trinity of some sort, in the case of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, you're missing the Virgin Mary. There's always a hidden fourth. So note that innovation, that he has added to the original Sat Chidananda this idea of a supermind, which is the instrument that is all-knowing and totalizing and creates the universe. And then, so we have those four, and then the fifth is matter, sixth is mind, and then, or matter, life, and then mind. Okay, so those are the seven. So once again, existence, consciousness, bliss, supermind, matter, life, and mind. Those seven. And of course, as we've looked at with Arthur Young, matter can be divided into light, particles, atoms, and molecules, whereas life can be divided into plants and animals. And with mind, as we'll see, there are a number of different levels that Aurobindo himself adds in: the ordinary mind, the higher mind, the illuminated mind, the intuitive mind, and then he'll introduce a new concept to end this part of the book with the overmind, which is a very interesting and crucial discussion. But now then, notice that he adds an eighth, the psychic being, and he points this out. So the traditional classical seven that Jean Gebser points out in The Ever-Present Origin was always associated with the cavern of the nighttime sky, because there was always seven heavenly bodies. He has added Psyche an eighth. And Gebser says that in the modern West, starting with the Renaissance, we started getting rid of this closed cavern cosmos in favor of an infinite space cosmos, and that this was reflected in our languages. For example, in German, the opposition between eight and night, acht and Nacht. Nacht, you drop the N, and now you've got eight. Or in French, oui, nuit, you drop the N. In English, night, you drop the N, you've got eight. So it's interesting here. So now that he has expanded, he's even titled this The Sevenfold Chord of Being, to keep it with the tradition, but yet it's really eight. And not only that, but he's taken mind, as he points out here too, and divided it into a dual principle. There's the outer mind, the ego-desiring mind, and then there's the inner subliminal mind, the psychic being / Purusha mind. So let's take a look at this model of involution, evolution here that he has. As this is how he lists it. So you have involution there on the right-hand side, where it moves down then from, and here he has all eight principles, from existence at the top, Sat, to consciousness, Chit, to bliss. And that's not an evolution. Those are three in one, just like the Christian Trinity are consubstantial with each other. They can be viewed as stages, but they're really three in one. And then the supermind in the middle there. Then mind with all of its various stages. Then psyche, then life, then matter. That's the involution of consciousness as it descends from above. And then our task as beings on this earth is to evolve then through all the various stages of matter. Life evolves through the four different stages of matter, as we have seen with Arthur Young: light, subatomic particles, atoms, and molecules. Then with life, regaining its freedom with plants and animals, and then with the various aspects of the psychic being, the ego on the one hand, and then the Purusha on the inside on the other, and then the various 5 or so levels of mind, that Aurobindo ascribes to the mind. Then we have the all-encompassing and totalizing supramind, and then we're trying to get back up to and experience that being consciousness bliss, the Satchitananda from which everything originated. And so that's the model there of Aurobindo's evolution idea. So that's the upshot of this chapter. He does conclude this chapter with an interesting note that made my mind wander a bit, where he's talking about what this process would be like if it were to take place on other worlds, and I assume by that he means other planets. And I'll read the paragraph here. He says, in any given world, its scale and harmony of being may be openly in possession of all seven. Now it's 8, though. We've broken out of the traditional cavern world of the night sky, at a higher or lower degree of activity. In another, they may be all involved in one, which becomes the initial or fundamental principle of evolution in that world. But evolution of the involved there must be. The evolution of the sevenfold power of being, the realization of its septuple name, must be the destiny of any world, which starts apparently from the involution of all in one power. You can think of the fact that, too, by the way, that Aurobindo is the reincarnation of Akhenaten, and then Akhenaten had this idea of the sun disk as one, with its rays extending down from it, the many extending from the one, like Satchitananda, and the supermind extending from it, and there's a helping hand at the end of each one of these rays. It's a kind of similar idea. But then he adds this footnote here, too, where he says, in any given world, there need not be an involution, but only a subordination of the other principles to one, or their inclusion in one. Then evolution is not a necessity of that world order on that particular world. This made me think of the idea of exoplanets. We've been discovering exoplanets ever since the 1980s, and we were finding more and more of them lately. And so what I want to do here is just glance for a second at this possibility of what it would be like if indeed there were life on, which I'm 100% certain there is, of course, life on other planets, and how they're calculating this. We've been sending out the Kepler telescope, the TESS telescope. Now in November, they're going to send up a new one, the James Webb telescope, and they keep finding more and more of these exoplanets, and it all depends. They're able to calculate the nature of a habitable planet based on its the size of the sun. Here we have the life cycle of a star, which can go two different ways as it emerges out of a nebula. A nebula is just a cloud of dust and gas, and in our case, the nebula originated, part of it came from a supernova of another exploding star that seeded it with all kinds of elements, mostly hydrogen and helium, and ice crystals and dust, that gradually cohere and concretes together under the influence of gravity to form a protostar, which then ignites to begin burning hydrogen and into helium, which is what our sun is doing. So on the top there you have the average star, which is ours, which will eventually run out of hydrogen, and then it'll start burning helium to create carbon, and then we'll get a red giant, which is much cooler. It's much larger, but as it shifts from yellow, orange to red, it actually paradoxically gets cooler, and then it'll eventually dissipate as it burns from carbon into oxygen and a whole bunch of different elements, and then we get a planetary nebula, and then it will eventually leave behind a white dwarf. The other way it could go is you could get a star coming out of a similar nebula with a massive star that's blue, and blue is way hotter than either red or yellow. Way hotter, but blue stars burn at a much quicker rate. They only last for a few million years. And then, in that case, a red supergiant. And then it will explode into a supernova, as apparently the star did that preceded the origin of our spinning Laplacian dust cloud, from out of which our star came. And then it'll leave behind either a pulsing sort of neutron star on the one hand, or a black hole on the other. But so they can figure out these exoplanets depending on the type of star that they're dealing with. Let me see here. Where are we at? So what I want to look at are the exoplanets now. So now, from this, they've been able to deduce within the Milky Way itself. They found, I think, about 4,000 official exoplanets, but of those that are habitable, they have to inhabit. There has to be a relation to a certain type of star, and it has to inhabit what's called the Goldilocks Zone, which is the zone that's not too close to the sun and not too far away, not too hot, not too cold. And they found about roughly 30 habitable planets so far in the Milky Way. And this is a list of them here. And you can see the scale in relation to Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Neptune. Most of them are larger than the Earth as you look at them. And my guess is that if they are habitable, they probably do have life on them. Where habitability occurs on a planet, you can probably turn it into a philosophical axiom that life will emerge on that planet. So these 30 planets probably all have life on them. I would put money on it. And the other interesting thing, too, to remark about our solar system, with regard to Earth and Mars, apparently Mars was a sort of twin of Earth. It had an ocean. We're 100% certain of that. And it is most likely that life originated there, too, at about the same time that it originated on Earth, starting with bacteria and working up through various protists and single-celled organisms, single-organ organisms, and maybe as far up as mollusks, something like that. And then there's a catastrophe, and the ocean dries up, and then Mars becomes an abortion. Just like in the myth of twins. Anytime you get a myth of twins like Castor and Pollux, one of them always dies. So apparently the experiment for evolution was supposed to take place on both planets. One aborted the project, and so it became centered on the Earth. I'm 100% certain at some point we will find fossils on Mars, not of intelligent life. I don't think it wasn't there, the ocean wasn't there for long enough to evolve that far. But now imagine Aurobindo's spiritual evolution taking place. Does it take place? Well, I mean, this is just pure speculation. Does it take place on all of these planets? Do they all have intelligent life, or do they just not have, they have life but not intelligent life? So that's another factor. How many of these planets that have life on them have intelligent life? And then if they have intelligent life, then in that case it moves then, like Aurobindo's model, from matter to life to mind. And then so one wonders just how far these planets would have gotten. And so anyhow, that's just a sort of a kind of side note there. Let's see. All right, so that's that chapter anyway. And then the next chapter is a very crucial chapter, chapter 28, Supermind, Mind, and the Overmind Maya. It's a long chapter, and it's the last chapter in Book 1. The book this is about the first third of the book, so this is about 300 pages, and it ends Book 1. Book 2 is the knowledge and the ignorance, the spiritual evolution, which will go through all the various aspects of psychology and the soul and so forth. But now he introduces, now for the first time, a new concept, the Overmind. So what he asks then, and the Overmind is the sort of top of all of his different mentalities. We have the ordinary, average, everyday herd animal mind. Then we have the higher mind of philosophy. Then we have the illuminated mind of art and aesthetics. Then we have the intuitive mind, which is the highest faculty that Aurobindo believes we possess, which represents flashes of the supermind, but they get muddled. Sometimes you get the flash of insight that your conceptual mind just tramples over like a bus running someone over, and we lose the intuition. So what Aurobindo wants to know now is, what is the linkage between where we have this avidya, this ignorance that separates mind from supermind? There must be a way to link intuition or the higher mind to the supermind. And keep in mind, remember what the supermind is. It is all-encompassing. It is the instrument that Brahman uses to create the world, and as far as it is concerned, it is a totality. It is an all-knowing, sort of omniscient totality, and so everything is all for it. And it's the first principle by means of which Brahman begins to inflect itself into unity, and then the multiplicity of all the various Purushas that it invents. And then so he comes up with this idea. So the linkage then is something that he's going to call the overmind. And the overmind is different from both the supramental on the one hand, to which it is linked, and intuition on the other, or let's just say the mind on the other. And so this linkage has to do with the fact that with regard to the mind sees everything in terms of either or. The world is either this or it is that. You're either a conservative or a liberal. In the pre-Socratics, the world is made up either out of water, as it is for Talus, or it is made up out of the Apeiron, as it is for Anaximander, or it is made up out of air for Anaximenes, or it is made up out of fire for Heraclitus. It's one of these others. The mind privileges something, and then it excludes all the other principles. So it's always giving primacy to something. The Overmind doesn't do that. What the Overmind does is it's a step down from the Supermind, in which all is one, down to the level of division now, but it holds the divisions equally. So that, let's say, Purusha and Prakriti, let's say, from the point of view of Supermind, would be equal. There would be 2 and 1, in perfect harmony. But with Overmind, what Overmind does is it's the principle of giving independence. It's a sort of polytheism of ideas, philosophically, of gods. It gives life to each particular idea, each particular god. And as James Hillman says, there are gods in our ideas, so the distinction is an invidious one, perhaps. So there are gods in our ideas, but the Overmind sees the validity of each perspective. So for the Overmind, it's always both and. The Overmind sees the yin-yang symbol and says, well, the yang has this life that's perfectly equivalent to the yin, and together they comprise a whole. So it has to do with conferring independence on ideas and seeing how they link together, how different worlds can be linked together to form a single harmonious world. So it's a kind of principle of polytheism of ideas, whereas the Supermind sees everything in terms of a beautiful, integral, total harmony. And in this respect, I think that the Overmind is much closer to Gene Gebser's idea of the integral consciousness structure than to his mistaken comparison of the integral consciousness structure with the supramental, which they're not even vaguely the same thing. They're not analogous in any way, shape, or form. So let's take a glance here at my last diagram for this talk. Let's take a look at this diagram of the overmental. And so you can see here the overmental at the top, and it has a Maya aspect to it. On the left there, you can see that it has a formative Maya aspect that enables it to do this, to create this sort of polytheism in the world of ideas, of gods, and give each one its validity. And then there it is as the logos, which is the principle of giving independence to every idea and to every god and to everything, every perspective, every point of view. There is no such thing as a mutually exclusive idea with respect to the Overmind. And then we have the perceptive or intuitive Overmind, which is the combination of the other two. And then you can go down the list together and then down the list and see all of his other different minds, the higher mind, and all the different minds. You can read them going down the list all the way to the physical. That just gives you a kind of map for where the Overmind is situated with respect to all these other minds, the vital mind, the physical mind, all the different levels of mentality. So everything in Aurobindo is about levels, mentalities and levels, going on up from the inconscient world of matter all the way up to the realms of the gods, Brahmaloka, Devaloka, all those realms that he'll get to later on in the book. But I like that he concludes this book one with this kind of fireworks show of the overmental, the Overmind, which is an idea that I like quite a bit. And I like how he distinguishes it from the supramental, which is a totally different thing. Two totally different things. But they link the Overmind links the mind together with the supramental, which is, of course, the emissary, let's say, of the Satchidananda, the Brahman, the ultimate, the one that is beyond all. You can almost say that whereas Satchidananda, everything is just one single sort of lifeless, inert Satchidananda, whereas the supramental takes that oneness and starts putting it into action with creation, but it still is capable of seeing things in totalities, whereas the Overmind begins to make these divisions while seeing the independent activity and non-exclusivity of each point of view and each individual living thing. And then we drop down from that to the mind, which sees things in terms of divisiveness, either or thinking. So we'll leave it there for this discussion of the first third of Aurobindo's Life Divine.